In today's chat, I'm speaking with Alex Lubyansky, an M&A attorney with Acquisition Stars, about why securing specialized legal advice early in the business sale process is a game changer. Alex explains how bringing in an M&A expert before you get too far down the road can help you avoid costly legal mistakes, ensuring the right deal structure, and ultimately optimize your transaction value and post-sale proceeds. Don't wait until it's too late. Tune in to hear how early legal planning can pave the way for a smoother, more profitable exit. So, Alex, a lot of businesses already have a business attorney. So, when they're looking at a sale, what is the reason they should look at having a specific M&A attorney in their process?
Yeah, so a typical business attorney is great and very useful for a business. But when you really start talking about the acquisition space, it's incredibly important to involve a specialist who that's what they traffic in. And, to put it in soccer terms, you wouldn't necessarily want someone who just trains your team during practice to also be the manager during a game. So, the earlier you can involve a proper M&A specialist in the process, the better. They're able to plan proactively, strategically, address deal structures, tax implications, leverage points within the negotiation that general business attorneys may have some vague familiarity with, but it's not something that they encounter routinely.
I had a previous interview with a former business owner, and they had used their business attorney in the process. And one of the things they had to do was really get the business attorney up to speed on what the business was, right? Because they're used to just doing contracts and things. Can you speak to a little bit of like how you ramp up more quickly, or how your understanding of a business in general helps you sort of expedite the process versus having to backtrack and be like, this is what we do, these are who our clients are, these are our key clients, these are relationships we want to protect. Like, how do you approach that with your clients when you get started?
Of course, and it's such a great question and an important one. So, really, when we talk about the best time to hire a proper M&A advisor is, years before the deal. The second best time is today. And for those very reasons, it is so central that there is this relationship and this understanding. And, for our firm, when we're brought on, that's absolutely something that is put together very, very proactively and early on and cost effectively so that rather than being viewed as this sort of running clock of misery, no, the billable hours are racking up and up and up and up with no end game. It's tailored to the individual goals of the individual client. And that initial phase is just so important to set a rhythm, a cadence, a relationship where when a deal does heat up, there is so much work that's already been done on the front end that you can be strategic and you can be efficient. If you're brought in at the midnight hour, unfortunately, it's almost impossible, one, to avoid that kind of massive lift just to get up to speed, and two, to execute properly. There's just no time without that work on the front end. When you're brought on that late in the game, there's already things that can't be undone.
Which leads me to my next question. So I also harp on like starting earlier, even in like the personal planning process. So talk a little bit about how they can avoid some of the major pitfalls or curveballs you get if you start a little sooner, or even like what some of those pitfalls are if you don't start soon enough.
Yeah, I mean, if you're brought into a deal late in the game, there's already been so much conversation, discussion that, as you know from any general negotiation, when something's been stated, it's almost like it's been willed into existence. And it's difficult to backtrack. It's difficult to be strategic. It's difficult to really optimize the structure when there have been conversations that have gone on before. For that reason, really one of the key decisions to make is what role will the advisor play? Are they the number one point of contact? Are they behind the scenes being strategic? And those are decisions that are made for a variety of reasons, client budget, of course, being one of them. But without the ability to be involved early on, you can't even effectively have that sort of planning and that sort of just foresight moving forward. That's where people end up getting in trouble is when you bring someone in late, you've already had conversation with the other side. Certain strategic decisions have already been at minimum discussed. And again, if they've been discussed in a certain way, it's difficult to then undo.
What's the thing that you like, oh, you did not say that already? Like, what are some of the things that business owners do that you're like, no?
Well, there's quite a few, and I think emotional toll and emotional preparation is one of the keys. Often you almost end up anticipating that the deal is going to go all the way. And one of the things that ends up happening, especially in sort of smaller entities, founder-led entities, is you start to look, it's done. It's a done deal. I don't have to maybe show up in the same way day in and day out because I'm going to exit. And that exit it's not academic. It's not clear that it will actually transact. And often, if it doesn't, there's even this terrible pain of I now have to sort of pick up the pieces I've spent a long time thinking and planning that this is going to close and I'm on to the next chapter, and really it doesn't go there. So that's one of the main ones. In these types of deals, it's so important that you're able to have proper guidance, keep emotional stability, keep the ability to continue to operate your business as you're going through this. And the earlier you get someone involved that has done it time and time again, the more likely you are to have that sort of guidance and ability to optimize all of your next steps.
In a perfect world, I mean, well before you're going to sell, maybe perfect real world, perfect reality world, when would a business owner reach out to you? The first time they get an inquiry that they're not interested in, or they're like, oh, maybe I do want to sell, or just give us the rundown of ideal scenario.
If we're talking absolutely ideal scenario, it's something where right away, right away is the best. If you're even thinking about selling, what you want to have is the optionality. And again, our goal is not to just get to that part of the process, go through it and start over. It's to be a trusted advisor. It's to be involved at every phase of the game in a way that is collaborative, is proactive, is helpful, and again, meets the client's goals, even from a budgetary standpoint immediately. We're there to help. We are there to help guide the next 5, 10, 20 years of this company. And often even post close, there's obligations and things that need to continue to happen that, absent the proactive planning and the proactive roadmap of, hey, this is where it's headed, again, all of these things become very, very difficult. So, I'm sorry to keep harping on it and you keep kind of opening the door to it, but you can't be too early in the process to involve somebody. That
I'm
that
good
would
with
be a
harping.
possibility.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm good with
Yeah.
harping on early preparation. And I want to get to the post close because I know that a lot of owners get tripped up in that too. But before we go there, just a few other things on the whole preparation side. What kind of things from a legal standpoint? I mean, they understand due diligence, getting your books in order, tax strategies, all those kinds of things. What kind of legal things do they need to be thinking about to sell their business? Like maybe even two parts here. If we do like preparation for sale, and then what do they think about during the sale process?
Yeah, it's vital that from an entity record keeping perspective, all of your material contracts, your employment agreements, all of the documentation of the IP, everything's got to be buttoned up and everything's got to be really very much already inside of a data room. Think of from the buyer's perspective. If they're coming to the table and all of those items are so clean, so accessible, so efficiently stored, psychologically raises the value so much, as opposed to you're coming to the table and they're trying to sort of go back in time and explain verbal agreements and, oh, no, 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 don't worry about it, I have a handshake deal with that vendor. And those are not companies that end up selling for multiples. Those are companies that end up, if exiting at all, sort of devaluing themselves. So it's incredibly important that all of those items are very clean, very organized, very accessible, because money loves speed. And if you have all of it put together properly on the front end, and then you are approached, your value is significantly higher.
I love that. I've talked to a lot of people and I've not heard about it in that way. I think that's really great. Like not only readiness just for readiness sake, but also perception and its impact on valuation, right? And speed of the deal. That's really good. Speaking of valuation, from your legal perspective, I know there's lots of different ways to structure a deal, but how do you coach your clients on being ready for the structure? I mean, obviously the number that's on the table isn't always what ends up being the number. How do you prepare your clients from a legal standpoint for that valuation process?
Sure, it's a difficult one. And sort of, I always talk about you're not looking for the headline number that's going to generate good press. You're looking for the right structure, the right deal. So often you sort of see these deal structures get positioned in a way where it looks much better on paper than what the reality is. And one of the ways you see this sort of come to life is earnout provisions. And some of them, hearts are in the right place and there's an actual opportunity to reach those, but often they're structured in such a nuanced way and it's such a sort of a minefield of hidden obstacles, moving goalposts, that you'll never see a dime of those earnouts. And that's something to look out for is, hey, realistically, is this attainable? And if so, what's the pathway to get there? Tax structure, massively important. When you look at, again, what at the end of the day is actually going to end up in a tangible way going across and being the final figure, it's very different than what it may appear to be on paper. So, really try to set people up to look at the end of the day, what will actually be received post tax after all of the provisions. And it might not be on paper the highest number that was offered, but it might be the correct one and the most clear pathway to recovering it. And those are the bits and pieces that are so important from a structuring perspective that your attorney help you, sort of weigh, rather than, again, a headline piece. Those don't last very long in actual life terms. It's just a cool story for a moment.
Right. Moment in time, not the reality that you deal with afterward, right?
Yeah.
That's so good. A couple of questions for you in there. How far, I guess this is for my own edification too, if you're going to an M&A attorney, how much do you coach your clients or advise your clients, or knowledge do you possess around taxes, around post-sale, like even estate planning and trusts and all those kinds of things? Like how wide does your net go? Is it deal strictly? Talk a little bit about how far out you expand.
Yeah, so just from a procedural standpoint, I always recommend working with specialized tax advisors.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that said, I'm happy to dive into it some. And there's multiple fronts. There's the business, and then there's of course personal tax planning
Mm-hmm.
and figuring out solutions on the front end of the most effective structure. And you also have to look at state specific. Some entities are operating in various jurisdictions, and planning for that becomes very, very important. So the earlier somebody gets involved, the earlier you can start to game plan and put together massive benefits. So I think one of the hottest ones available right now is qualified small business. To meet the thresholds and the requirements to obtain, it's often in the millions of tax savings. You really have to be strategic. You have to have the correct formation. You have to have all of the requirements to qualify and proactively put yourself in a position where you can have that benefit realized. If it's something that is only brought up to you at the midnight hour, functionally, you simply can't obtain the benefits. So, for us, personal and business tax planning, yes, we of course recommend using a specialist tax advisor, but it's another area where it's just so important to get involved early so that you can plan and you can strategize and you can put yourself in a position to realize the benefits of your overall financial picture by being proactive and strategic.
Do you find yourself saying, great, here's all the things we need to think about, and make sure you get your tax advisor, make sure you get your, estate planning, your financial, your pertinent, we need to get all this together. Is that usually you, or do they already know this coming in?
Often some of these benefits are not actually known by the business owner, surprisingly enough. So I absolutely ask if there's an awareness, and often there isn't. You also could consider something along the lines of an installment sale or other solutions in order to mitigate tax impact. But yeah, that's part of our process. It's seeing sort of what they're aware of, garnering that awareness, and then advising just in generalities, and then bringing in a specialist to help execute upon all of it.
And then in the deal, Alex, what should they be ready to disclose? Or, obviously they're opening the kimono across the whole business, right? But from a legal standpoint, what should they be really prepared to have in order to disclose that might be something they're not aware of, or even maybe a little uncomfortable to reveal?
Yes, I mean, there's always items that are uncomfortable. There's always items that aren't as buttoned up on paper as they should be, could be. So, one of the key pieces to this, and it's just good general strategy, is if it is not disclosed and someone discovers it on their own and there's been no preparatory work and it ends up being this huge emotional surprise, often that can be very explosive. So if you can get ahead of items that you know are pain points for your business, that you know will be discovered, you can be strategic about how, when framing it, finding a explanation and a pathway to mitigate the impact, you have a better chance of your valuation staying intact. If you try to conceal it and hope for the best, these are not unsavvy parties on the other side. They will often find whatever it is that you're hoping they don't. And if they find it with no preparation whatsoever from your side and no strategy in place of how to bring that up, it often does very much impact the final outcome of the deal.
Yeah.
So again, there's the completely DIY approach, which I don't advise, or there's the approach where, yeah, hey, go ahead, you've done this before, take it end to end, and then that can be strategic. The hybrid approach where you're sort of coaching them through it and they go through the negotiation, it is absolutely something that is a huge part of the process, is preparing for those bits. And then of course, litigation. Is there a pending lawsuit? What does that look like? At what point will that be brought up? Is there any way, if you have the time and the bandwidth and the foresight, that there's an exit down the line to maybe resolve some of those? Anything that's resolved is much better than an unknown. And an unknown, the other side could weaponize and use against you in any number of ways.
Talk about how a business owner would find and evaluate a good mergers and acquisitions attorney. What should they look for? What kind of questions should they ask? How do they know if they actually know what they're doing?
I highly, highly, highly advise and recommend, and it might be the most simple advice ever, but just to meet them, to have a meeting, to take the time to see if there's a right fit of culture, personality, communication style, all of those things, and to interview more than one. And that way you're able to have a good opinion of the human being. There's so many options in the space that you're going to be spending significant time with this party and getting to know on a human level whether or not it's someone that you like, you trust, you're able to have open and honest conversations with. I don't think there's a shortcut to that process. I don't know that even I am comfortable if someone just finds my content on LinkedIn and immediately goes forward, no meeting, sight unseen. I have a meeting. That's my best advice.
Should they ask about other deals they've done, like experience wise, or is it really that initial conversation that's you're gonna get the right feel from that?
I think it's an initial conversation. Then, of course, talking about the specifics of, hey, have you been in my specific space? If not, what is something similar that maybe is in a different sector, but you could draw lessons from? Of course, that's a key part of it. But that personal touch, that personal interview process, I think it's absolutely vital that you have.
Yeah. All right. So you found your great attorney, you've done the deal, everything's good. You think like, voila, I'm done, right? But not always the case. To talk about some of the seller risks or legal obligations that often happen post-sale, that when you think of selling a business and having the big paycheck and I'm off to the Bahamas or whatever, off to my vacation, life is good.
There's a number of them. I mean, first of all, if you're selling, I always recommend, reps and warranties insurance and making sure that you're covered from that standpoint. But you're often not done. You're often not done. And soccer recently has adopted VAR, where a play happens and then you go back in time and you take a look at it, and the deal is very similar, right? It's look, you put yourself in a spot where there was likely an initial transaction and you receive that amount, but there is more on the table that you need to either stay actively involved, depending on how the transaction closed, or at minimum, not re-enter in a way that is adverse to business interests. So very rarely is the deal done at the time of deal. Often the obligations extend for years. And that's something that should absolutely be explained and monitored and helped by the M&A attorney. Also, sell side, and this is really analogous to sort of professional athletes leaving their sphere that they're familiar with and entering the world in another way. Exiting a business is often very similar. There's an emotional toll. And while on the front end, there's this sort of relief and excitement and celebration, we got across the line, there's remorse that comes in pretty often and emptiness and trying to figure out where to go next. So part of that process from the very beginning is trying to have a plan in place of where would you like your life to go post transaction, to make sure maybe it's philanthropic, maybe it's more family time. But if you're trying to figure that out after the fact, there's often this identity shift that is just so painful.
Mhm.
And I very much advise and work to make sure that that transition is both thought of and guided from an execution standpoint as well, above and beyond just a business transaction.
I love to hear that. You're speaking my language right now. I see a lot of people like call it like sort of the abyss that happens about a year after you exit if you don't think ahead of what's coming. Even if sometimes if you do think ahead of what's coming, but it's not the thing that's actually making your life feel meaningful after doing this big thing, right? Whether it's your professional athlete career or running a business or owning a business and selling it. Yeah. Have you seen any good examples of people really nailing that and doing it well? Like they thought about it, they gave it some thought, and there's the very usual like I'm going to go serve on a board or I'm going to start a nonprofit, like those kinds of things. Anything like super interesting that you've seen people do in their next chapter?
Yes. One of the more interesting ones I have seen is farming.
Oh,
And farming not for profit or gain, but farming for sustainability and for donation. And, that is something where while I personally don't understand it myself, I don't even know how to, plant a dandelion.
I think they're good on their own, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah, good. Exactly. That's the knowledge I have is
Yeah.
the minimum
Yeah.
below. So, it's just something where this particular party, they started up a farm and they donate tens of thousands of tons of produce a year. And it brings them tremendous satisfaction, joy, and it's still a physical trade that gets them out there, gets them actively involved. So that's one of the best ones I've seen.
I love that. Oh, that's so cool. That's definitely out of the ordinary. You nailed it. Alex, before we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't cover in these questions, that things that you see business owners do all the time, mistakes they make, anything that we didn't cover that's really pertinent for a business owner thinking about selling that they should know from a merger and acquisition attorney?
I think we covered everything, but I can't, reiterate enough that getting great strategy and advice as early as possible, whether or not you even choose to exit, is just such sound foundation for having a fulfilling business journey. And again, whether it's my firm or somebody else's, meet the person, have a great conversation, see if there's that synergy. And it could be one of the most impactful relationships of your whole professional life.
Yeah. It's a huge transaction, right? I mean, to your point, money, emotions, like you're opening up yourself to all kinds of vulnerable things. It's a big deal, a big relationship. Alex, how can people find you if they want to reach out to you and have a business they are thinking about selling?
Yeah, you find us Acquisition Stars and check out my personal LinkedIn page. I love posting all things family, law, M&A, soccer. Yeah, reach out anytime. I'd be happy to have a conversation.
Perfect. Thanks so much for sharing your time, your knowledge, and the great conversation. Thanks so much.